But first I want to talk a little bit about why the models that we're push marketing is prevalent don't work. So the basic model of communication in semantics is very transparent. You have these two people, one person says P, the other person hears it, and it's understood. And the assumptions on the first part is that there's no deceit intended, that A is telling the truth, and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And that B needs to know P, and that P is a fact. And then the assumptions on B's side are that B trusts A, that B is interested in P, and that B is capable of grasping P. And it turns out that in the real world, this basic communication model almost never happens. Like, we're always bending the truth, or we only say what we need to say to influence people and stuff. And so so the whole idea of meaning in semantics doesn't really work in the real world. What works is relevance. That in order to understand communication, you have to understand how communication is relevant. But just to get into a little bit more detail, so no deceit intended. It's marketing. Okay, I mean, how many people have tasted Corona? People have tasted Corona. Okay, how many people like the taste? Okay, how many people buy Corona anyway? More people, right? People buy Corona not because it tastes good, but because they see advertising a guy sitting on or couple sitting on a beach with a bucket of beer and you know, the surf and the environment. They have an emotional connection. They buy the thing, and that's marketing. And so no, there is deceit intended. We're trying to get them to do something. B needs to know P. In marketing, you're pushing stuff, at least I'm talking about traditional marketing, you push stuff on people whether they need to know it or not. And so that doesn't work. And P is a fact. 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed, there really were only 5 dentists surveyed for that, so no. B trusts A. This is the hardest thing. Like, our audience doesn't trust us. How do we earn their trust? That's because marketing has been pushing this stuff on people all the time. They just, you know, they're inherently skeptical, especially in digital. And the last two are the most important. Like, B is interested in P. Most of the time, when we push stuff on people, they're not really interested in it. And you have to sort of cajole them into actually being interested. So, then the last one, B is capable of grasping P in the time that they have. And this is really the biggest one that most marketers forget, is that our audience is very time challenged and very, it doesn't really want to expend. We're cognitive misers. So you have to make it easy for them. And so that's why really the basic communication model that people use to try to build marketing, at least they have prior to digital, doesn't work. It has to be, there's no meaning without relevance is what I say. So you focus on relevance rather than meaning, and you might have a chance. And that was really the basis for my first book, and it kind of a thread throughout my whole career. Okay, so, and I call it search first content strategy because the search data, the data that we use to understand the audience, primarily comes out of search. You can use social for more fine-grained analysis. You can mine your different logs and different actual transactional data on your site. That's important. But first and foremost, search data is the gold. And it's the best source of data on your target audience. This is everybody would recognize a Google Trends graph for cloud computing. What is cloud? PaaS, SaaS, and virtualization. All related terms in the same cluster around cloud. Little quiz. Who can tell me why the yellow graph has a spike every year? The word? Easter. Right. So that's a signal. You need, as Marcus, the person who spoke on this stage before me, said, you need a year's worth of data. The more you have, 2 years is probably a better sample. But you can kind of understand the seasonality of some of these things, and you can really mine, like you can go in deep. on what the search demand is for these words. And then it's not just about demand, of course. You also have to look at the results. And that's what we do, is we look carefully at what is actually ranking for these words, and not that we want to copy it, but we want to take insights from those ranking pages to try to help us understand really what does Google think is relevant to the target audience for these keywords. And I started, I built my first search course at IBM in 2007, and since then I have every year had this uncomfortable discussion with an executive who said search is dead. I've been reading, search is dead. Nobody does search anymore. It's all about social, or it's all about this or that, some other tactic. And I just pull out this graph every time they say it. And it's the other interesting fact about this graph is you notice how the mobile side has really grown. And so maybe desktop search is dead. In the tech world, when somebody says it's dead, it just means it stopped growing. It's not really dead. It's just in stasis. But in mobile, it really is growing hugely. And so I'm going to ask a question. What do you think is the main way people search in mobile? How do people search in mobile with their devices? Voice, right? They ask actual questions. And so you can, and this is what, again, I'm going to be quoting Marcus a lot up here. Marcus had a great talk before me. You can just mine those questions and answer them in a compelling way for your target audience. And really, that's it. That's the strategy. And for those queries that are not in the form of questions, they're sort of elliptical questions, if you will. They resolve into questions. You just have to build your buckets of questions, and you put the other queries into them, depending on how it makes sense. That's basically the model that I'll be talking about. Okay, so, and most of you know what this is, but I'll just kind of give my definition. It's not just about like the topic, but it's really what do they need to do? What is their task that they're trying to accomplish? And the information that you have to build is going to help them with that task. That's your goal. So, and there are different tasks, and I know we could segment the tasks into hundreds of different information tasks, but I like to do it into 3 buckets. Informational, so it's, like when we say just Google it, like you get into an argument with a family member about a particular fact, and you just say, just Google it, and that's the answer. That's an informational query. And actually, this is the largest bucket of queries for our target audience, or for our target audiences if you work for a B2B company or an agency that serves them. And it's the least mined. I mean, it's like companies really struggle to build content for informational queries. And then there's navigational queries, which are basically, I already know the answer pretty much, but I just want to make sure that I have the best resource for that. And that's the next size bucket. And the smallest bucket, oddly enough, is a transactional query, which everybody understands, because that's really when I talk to executives, they're like, how are we doing on this product query? And I'm like, well, it's a very small query volume, but we're doing pretty well, because oddly enough, Google gives us credit for our own brand names. So here's an example of how we would take a query, a what is query, and try to understand what is the best audience intent for it. So this is an obvious one. What is? They're definitely at that informational stage in their journey. And is Jeff here? Jeff, you beat me. Tech target. So I used to own the #1 position in this because we invented the term cognitive computing. When I first started building content around cognitive computing, there were 5 queries a month in Google. And we built a periodic table of keywords around cognitive computing. And for each of those keywords, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, machine learning, et cetera, we built content that was like what is, how, what, why, how, for each of those different query forms. And it all kind of led to this one, what is cognitive computing? And so all of that content which was also ranking in Google for these other words, led to cognitive computing being the #1 result. And 6 months later, there were 1,400 queries for cognitive computing. So we owned the page, and then Jeff, who worked for TechTarget, built a knowledge graph page for it. Thank you very much. But anyway, that's all right. I'll get you another time. No, anyway, so that's the method. You mine the queries that they have, and in some cases you can actually build knowledge. You can build your own brand using other words and pointing the content to your brand. And our brand in this case is cognitive computing. Okay, so how do we model audience intent? And there's really 3 buckets. So first of all, everybody talks about personas, and like I think we have a database of 100 personas or something like that. And really, and that's great for fine-grained analysis for the data scientists. But for the marketers that I serve, it's just easiest to bucket it into 2 types. Because there are 2 primary ways that people behave on the web. And there's business people and specialists. So how many people here are business people? Okay, and then specialists, like word nerds and data scientists and other geeks. Oh, okay. I thought there'd be more. Well, that's good, because so now I kind of understand the information model I need to use to present the rest of this deck, because that's what we do. We try to say, so the business people tend to use informational queries, the top of the funnel. They get to a certain point in their journey, and it's like, they move on to something else, and they delegate a lot of their information tasks to specialists. Specialists, they get really into the gorpy details with navigational queries. The other thing that I find interesting is that business people tend to use transactional queries. So when they get the answers from their specialists as to what they should buy, then they start with the transactional queries at the end of the funnel. And the specialists do a lot of work with influencers and forums and social. So social is really a bigger thing for specialists than business people. And we use this segmentation as well for our social modeling. So the other thing about personas is that a lot of people think, I'm just going to one-to-one marketing. I'm just going to bring this one person through the different steps in the journey. And the reality is, at least for us in large B2B companies with long sales cycles, it takes a village to buy a product. And this is the cohort for our marketing suite. Emily is the lead. She's our lead persona. But there are all these influencers on the left, and at least on I guess on the left, and then on the right, these are people that she needs to influence. And all of them have discrete content tasks that they have to complete, and we have to build content for each of them one-to-one, but really we're building content for this whole cohort that each have different parts to play in the buyer journey. And that's it adds a level of complexity, but it also kind of takes some of the strain off of trying to explain, for example, to Emily, the gorpy details of why Silverpop has a better footprint than some other competitor. So then I like to also segment the queries into the 3 buckets I mentioned: what, why, and how. So and what is the first? What is big data? Why is AI so important for big data? How does IBM solve big data problems? So at a certain point, they get to the branded side, but they start their journey in the big queries. The queries that have the high volumes are unbranded. They're not talking about products yet. They're not ready for any kind of product discussions. And it's tying those unbranded queries into ultimately to a branded journey. That's the secret sauce. It's very difficult to say when somebody's querying an unbranded term that they're really interested in a particular product set. And you have to kind of follow them through their different queries and try to understand what products they might be interested in. And then there might be several products or even suites of products that they might be interested in at a certain point. So you can't just funnel them into a particular product or other as needed.